Hi everybody, I'm at the very last part of our chapter 12 lecture, and where I left off was looking at Julian Rotter's social cognitive theory. Specifically, we were talking about locus of control. I asked you to consider whether you have an internal or external locus of control. I didn't really explain what it meant, so I'm kind of having you go based off your own individual understanding of locus of control. But locus of control is referring to your center or source of control. When you look at your life circumstances, who do you feel is in control of the outcomes? Do you have an external locus of control where you feel like things outside of you ultimately control the outcomes, like fate, destiny, God's will, or, unconscious or happenstance? Or do you feel like you have an internal locus of control where you're in control of your outcomes and your destiny, where it's based on your choices, your actions, your feelings, and your direct influence over the circumstances? And within reason, obviously there has to be balance, right? You can't fully believe that things outside of you. You have to recognize your own free will and your own power and your own ability to assert healthy perspectives and behaviors. You can't be so internally driven that you don't recognize that there are some things outside of your control, because that could be very psychologically unhealthy as well. So it certainly needs to be a balanced perspective. But in general, we do know that those with an internal locus of control have greater success. They're more capable of managing high levels of stress, and they don't bear the impact of that stress in the same negative way. And all of our CEOs in the world and most of our world leaders maintain that internal locus of control. So it does tend to be a more empowering perspective and a more kind of a peaceful, serene perspective, because you feel like you can influence the outcome, so you're not helpless like we talked about in chapter 6. So I would encourage you, if you feel like you have an external locus of control, I would encourage you to try to adopt an internal locus of control. It starts by telling yourself you're in control. It starts by telling yourself that you have more power and influence. It starts by telling yourself that you can positively impact your circumstances. So I would encourage you to take that approach and see if it has a positive influence on your life. Sorry, I had to get up and tend to my bunnies. They're trying to chew themselves out of their cage. Anyway, so let's move on to some biological theories of personality. Some suggest that personality is held in your brain, and that different hemispheres of the brain influence different aspects of your personality. They suggest that people that are left-brained are more extroverted, and people that are right-brained are more introverted. Your left hemisphere is often associated with more like sequential reasoning, more logical step-by-step reasoning. Your right hemisphere is often associated with more kind of creativity, big picture thinking. And so it almost kind of seems opposite to me in terms of personality. We also have neurochemistry that affects our personality. We'll talk about this in chapter 11 as well. It comes up where we talk about different neurotransmitters that influence our arousal levels. And sensation seekers tend to need a higher threshold of, risk taking before they actually reach those arousal levels. You and I might stand in front of a room and deliver a speech and experience an arousal response where we get nervous or uncomfortable or stressed, or maybe when we're driving 85 miles an hour on the freeway, we have that arousal response. For them, though, they may need to be driving 120 before they get aroused. So there is a biochemical process involved in arousal, and they may need higher levels of neurotransmitters and stimulation before they feel that arousal. So, we might be more like deadbeats to them because, why are we so sedentary? Why aren't we out there taking risks and taking chances? So people that do have that sensation seeking, they might get really bored with someone that maybe has a lower threshold and gets nervous really easily. Additionally, we know that genetics plays some role in personality. Behavioral genetics studies actually do a lot of twin comparisons, and they compare personality similarities between monozygotic twins, which are identical, dizygotic twins, which aren't identical, normal siblings, and they say, is your personality more like, a cousin, a sibling, a twin, or an identical twin? And if it's more similar to an identical twin, if they have more similar personalities than other relationships, it indicates that it's largely due to genetics, because when they come from one egg, they share 100% of the same genes. They also use adoption studies where they compare children to their adoptive parents or their biological parents. And when they resemble their biological parents more than expected, then they realize that genes have a greater involvement than what they realized. And they do find that personality traits do tend to be more similar among monozygotic twins. And in adoption studies, personalities typically are more similar to that of the biological parents than the adoptive parents, indicating the importance of genetics and personality. So the last part is a biopsychosocial theory of personality that's more of a kind of eclectic view that recognizes that there's biological factors. If you look at the word, there's biological factors based on genetics, whether it's genes, brain chemistry, our lobes. There's also psychological factors referring to our own individual cognitions, our own beliefs, our attitudes, our interpretations, our perceptions. And then there's social influences as well, including the modeling, the context, the parenting, things of that nature that are emphasized in some of the theories we've talked about. This perspective suggests that a good half of our personality comes from genetics. The rest might come from non-shared environmental factors. In other words, I may be more like a sibling or a twin. 50% of that's the genes that we share. 27% of that is my own individual fact pattern, which would be the psychological aspect, my own experiences. We might have some shared experiences, and then a good 25%, we just don't know what's contributing to it. And so it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to realize that this is a dynamic and complex world. It's never a simple answer. Quite often, multiple things work together to shape us into the people we are, and personality theory is no different. So I'm going to end discussing some tests that they use to assess personality. They do quite often use interviews and observations. A therapist will very much do like a personal history on you, a medical history, a case history. They'll talk to you about your expectations, your overall views on life. And during that interview, they're making observations about you. They're taking notes. They're drawing conclusions about your personality type and maybe some barriers that you might be facing that might be hindering your full development. Some therapists will also use projective tests. Usually it's the psychoanalytic or psychodynamic therapists that use projective tests. Again, projective tests are kind of a peek into your unconscious, where you're showing, this is like a Rorschach ink blot test, and this is the thematic apperception test. You're shown an image and you're asked to interpret that image, and theoretically your interpretation represents your unconscious, what might be repressed in there. And so, for me, I see this as, similar to a pelvic bone or a bat. So maybe a psychodynamic perspective or psychoanalytic would, see if I'm looking at it as a bat, I'm thinking that, maybe there's something that's lurking or haunting me, or something I'm afraid of, or some dark, dreary secret. Or it could just be that it looks like a bat. I'm really not keen on projective tests. Most of the Rorschach ink blot tests, I think they all look like pelvises and uteruses. And so I don't know, maybe they would say that's because I have an obsession with, motherhood or femininity, or who knows. I just think that physically they look more like a bat or a uterus. So the thematic apperception test is a little bit different. This is more just abstract. It could be anything. This is a very specific scene, but you're supposed to describe what you think might be happening in the scene, what might be contributing to this emotional expression or this emotional expression. You're supposed to interpret what those emotional expressions are. And again, that's you projecting your unconscious feelings and thoughts onto this, the interpretation of this scene. And so it gives the psychoanalytic therapist an opportunity to kind of get a glimpse into your unconscious and to try to explain what might be going on. And then there's more objective tests. As you can see, this is very subjective. It relies heavily on your psychoanalyst's interpretation of your interpretation. So that's really interesting. The objective personality test are paper and pencil tests. And the most popular is the MMPI, or the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Test. It has both clinical scales and validity scales built into it. The clinical scales allow the test to be used as part of a diagnostic tool. So in addition to the MMPI, they're going to do an interview observation. They're going to use the DSM. They're going to see if you meet the diagnostic criteria by using a checklist. But this is one way where they might know what disorders to look for, because the DSM-5 is literally an expansive book, so they wouldn't know what to look for. In any event, and here's the different clinical scales that they could be testing for. You could be showing signs of any one of these disorders. And there's also validity scales built in. They're looking for consistency with which you answer the questions. Are you trying to project yourself as this perfect person without any flaws? Are you too pessimistic and negative? Is there consistency? They have questions that are written in reverse manners, and they want consistency and reliability between questions that are all kind of getting at the same thing. And if you don't show a high degree of reliability between answering those questions, it produces invalid results, which alerts the person that's administering the test to the fact that you may not be completely honest in your answering of the questions, or it could in fact, it could in fact indicate maybe a little bit of narcissism as well. So they will use the results, the quantitative results of the study, to help as one of the many tools toward diagnosing a psychological disorder. So that pretty much wraps up Chapter 12. I hope that you have a really good overview of all the theoretical perspectives. I also hope that you kind of can recognize what theories or perspectives you agree with the most and what seem to be most logical to you, and then just know kind of the core ideas and concepts related to each theory. And I will see you again when we cover the next module. Enjoy.